is Rishi Agarwal. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Avantis RegTech. We are a TeamLease company. And I have with me a number of senior executives and associates from TeamLease today for this wonderful session on labor codes decoded. This webinar today is being conducted in association with Thane Belapur committee. And we really thank them for this opportunity to come and talk to all of you about this reform process, the first of its kind, overall reform for labor that has been brought forward now. So I wish to take about an hour, so about 50 minutes or so for the purpose of giving you an overview. We'll talk about what labor laws have been, the legacy labor laws, what is being proposed, and this entire transition. What does it mean in terms of labor compliance? What should we all know and keep in mind? Understanding the highlights of draft rules and so on. Towards the end, you can use the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting that we have, and please put in your questions. We have a number of specialists today on the call who will help address these queries as well. So with that, let me get it started, and we will talk about labor reforms today. So before we get into the labor laws, let's spend a couple of minutes and put labor laws in context and perspective. So this slide tells you about the overall regulatory environment of India. We have about 1,536 acts with 69,233 compliances, with about 6,618 filings across central, state, and local laws in India. These are broken down into 7 broad categories, labor being one of the largest categories with 463 acts, about 32,000 compliances, and so on. There are other 6 categories. I'm sure you're all familiar with them, but for the purpose of this conversation, let me quickly zip through them. EHS stands for Environment, Health and Safety, deals with pollution control boards at central and state level, deals with consent to establish, consent to operate, and all of that. That's EHS for you. Finance and taxation is another large category of compliance that deals with direct tax, indirect tax, customs, FEMA, and so on. Commercial deals with equipments, hoists, lifts, cranes, pressure vessels, boilers, hazardous tools, tackles, all of that have compliance implications. They fall into commercial. Secretarial deals with your company secretarial compliances, which are, SEBI, MCA, NSE, BSE, and so on. Industry-specific deals with regulatory, including RBI, TRAI, FSSAI, and so on. So today, our focus will be on labor compliances and the overall reform process that is currently being unfolded in labor. Labor, as you can see, constitutes a fairly sizable chunk of the compliance base of India. This slide hopefully helps you put the numbers in perspective. So as we discussed, there are 1,536 acts, 463 between center and states fall into labor. You often hear about 44 central acts and so on. I just wanted to let you all know labor is a concurrent subject. Both center and states legislate acts and rules on labor laws, and hence when you add them all together, it amounts to almost 463 acts. So in terms of pure number of acts, labor constitutes about 30% of the overall compliance burden of India. Moving on to compliances, there are about 69,233 compliances that affect corporate India. About 32,000 compliances out of these between center and states fall into labor, which is about 47% of the burden. In terms of filings, out of 6,618 filings, about 3,000 plus filings falls into labor. So in terms of filings, almost 46% of the total number of filings fall into labor. So as you can see, labor laws form the backbone of compliance environment or regulatory environment of India, and managing labor laws is very, very important, as they are really about 45 to 50% of the overall compliance burden in the country. Moving on, just to put some quick context around what these laws are, 32,000 is a very, very large number. A lot of people often get confused about what these kinds of acts and compliances look like. I've put a couple of slides here just to quickly get you a flavor of what these are. So there are various kinds of licenses and permits, EPF, ESIC, LWF, which is Labor Welfare Fund, SNE, which is shops and establishment, Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, payment of gratuity, registration of internal committee as far as prevention of sexual harassment of women at the workplace is concerned, registration of principal employer. So these are examples of some of the licenses and registrations that we as practitioners have to take up for establishment, whether it's a shops establishment or factory will determine the specifics, but these are some examples. In terms of returns, there are various kinds of returns, quarterly, half yearly, and annual, and so on. For example, under the Employment Exchange Act, the notification of vacancies is there. There are various kinds of frequencies. ER1 form is at a quarterly level. There's another one at a biennial level. Professional taxes at a monthly level. Contribution to ESI and Labor Welfare Fund at half yearly level. Various kinds of reports on training engagement and eligibility of apprentices at half yearly level. So these are all examples. There is a maternity benefits annual, payment of bonus, another annual, and so on. In terms of registers, a typical company and MSME today in India deals with at least 40 to 50 registers on labor alone in the state of Maharashtra. Examples are various kinds of registers around leave in attendance or muster rolls, wage registers, accident registers, fines and deduction registers, various kinds of registers. They fall into different acts. These are some examples. There are various items around safety, which are exhaust fans, maintenance of humidity and temperature levels, distances between machines, lux levels on lighting, sound levels in decibels. Again, some examples around safety. Then there are various items around displays, child labor, name of the establishment in local languages, names of inspectors, notice of holidays, and so on and so forth. Various kinds of records around medical records for every employee, medical examination on particular frequencies, based on age, based on whether they are working in hazardous processes or not, and so on. So these are all examples of some of them. Various kinds of committees are required: safety committee, canteen committee, welfare committee, POSH committee, management of these committees, constitution, reconstitution, operations, meetings, minutes, actions, action items, tracking of action items. All of these are a part of committee operations. And then various kinds of intimations that need to be done on occurrence of various events. So for example, when there is a change to the factory manager, there is an intimation. Working on national and festival holidays, amendment to industrial employment standing orders, these are all examples. So when we talk about labor compliances, this is the length and breadth, and these are just some illustrative examples to know what these compliances are and what are the types, categories, and so on. Now let's move to the next part of our presentation today, which is labor reform. And before we talk about labor reform, it's very important to understand, why is reform required? What was the problem with the legacy law? Why did we need a reform? So here is a slide that we have put together, which helps us understand the issues in the historical or the legacy labor laws. Some of these labor laws were created pre-independence. You will see various acts: Employee Compensation Act 1923, Trade Union Act, and so on and so forth. They were created, drafted pre-independence. And over a period of time, some tweaks, some tunings have been done, but an overhaul has not been done. For the first time, 2020, we went through a process where the codification happened. The Parliament legislated these, President assented them, draft rules are coming out as we speak. So let's first talk about what were the issues. One would assume that India's labor laws would cover a large majority of the working class or the workers. The unfortunate part is the current labor laws, they address only formal employees. So about 9% of the current labor, our current labor laws, they cover only 9% of the India's employee base. The rest of them are not covered. Farm workers, informal workers, workers working for companies which are not in the formal sector, micro enterprises, all of those do not have any benefit of the labor law. So first problem, which was the most important problem, is applicability. Only 9% of India's labor force benefits from India's labor laws today. So one of the key objectives was to expand this base so that a larger portion of our workforce can start benefiting from the labor law. So that's one. The second problem here is there was no provision for gig workers, platform workers, fixed term employment. All of these did not find any provision in the existing labor law. So while the world has changed since independence, and a lot of different kinds of employment contracts have come up, but our labor laws have not kept pace, and they have failed to accommodate the realities of the new life. When you look at companies around you, especially the e-commerce companies like the Amazons and the Flipkarts, or Swiggies and the Zomatos, all of them employ a new class of workers, which are the gig workers. And unfortunately, our existing labor laws fell short, did not provide any coverage there. Then there are several different licenses, registrations, and exemptions under different acts. One has to take so many different licenses and registrations. There is multiplicity of them. I'm sorry, there's some issue with my slide. The same information is showing up again and again. Excuse me for that. I'll talk about some of the issues with the existing labor laws. So there are too many licenses and registrations. Then there is multiplicity of returns. Then there is no provision or very little provision for digital record keeping. Most of the records continue to stay physical. There is a lot of engagement with government, because inspectors can come. There are at least 12 different inspectors under different labor laws that can inspect an enterprise today. These are all examples of issues that have been there. Unions can go on strike. There is very little accountability there. There are no provisions for notice. Industrial disputes between employer and employees drag on for extended period of time. These are all examples of issues that we see as far as current labor laws are concerned. If these are the issues, what should the reform address? First, the labor laws need to cover a larger population of or employee base. So that's the first one. The percentage has to be much larger. The second, we needed to reduce or eliminate ambiguity in interpretation of the law. Applicability, thresholds, components of wages, all of these, there are ambiguities in understanding, interpretation. There's a lot of duplication. Then the labor laws reforms should simplify licenses, permissions, and registrations and consent orders. We should not have to take so many of them with so frequent renewals. Then the number of returns and registers that are required to be maintained have to come down, because there are just too many of them right now. A typical corporate deals with over 150 different returns registers in labor laws alone in a typical year. And I'm talking about MSMEs, not large size enterprises. The regulatory record keeping needs to allow for digital record keeping. The world is going digital. In December of 2020, India did over 2 billion digital payments from just a handful about 2 years ago. The world is going digital. India is going digital at a faster pace, but a lot of these records still need to be maintained and submitted in paper format. So digital record keeping and standardization is another one. Redundancy and overlaps needed to be removed. There are way too many redundant and duplicate items. 7 to 8 different registers for wages, 4 different accident registers, 10 different formats of muster rolls, 3 different formats for fines and deductions. We do not need so many of them. So one of the agendas for reform was to reduce this. One of the other agendas was to reduce Inspector Raj, so that self-certification, third-party certifications are enabled. Another one is making all interactions between the department and the government faceless, presenceless, and cashless. So that is yet another very important one, so that we can reduce opportunities for rent seeking and corruption. Another item here is to provide greater flexibility to employers to ramp up and down vis-a-vis the market demand. The manufacturing moved to just in time a long time ago, but if you look at labor, they are a fixed component in India. When you have a sudden order and you need a sudden surge, the laws do not accommodate a scenario where you can go hire a large number of pool of employees for a short duration to satisfy specific demand. Once you bring an employee on board, your ability to offboard the employee once the demand has been met comes with very rigid laws. The last item is the reforms needed to make labor unions more accountable, and that is another area that the reform should have addressed. So We looked at some of the problems as far as redundancy, duplication, overlap, multiplicity, ambiguity, too many minimum wages. So just to give you an example, state of Karnataka, which is not even the largest state in the country, currently deals with about 1440 different permutations and combinations of minimum wages. There are 12 different inspectors that can come. All of these have been issues. And let's see how our labor laws, the reform process, has helped transform this scenario, helped reform this scenario. So let's first look at the highlights. I have captured the highlights of the 4 codes in 2 slides, and then we will go through code by code for the draft rules. At a highlight level, I hope you can see my screen. Here is the quick highlight. I'm talking about the current laws, 44 in all, 29 which are legacy labor laws, 15 that were repealed since 2016. So 15 labor laws acts were repealed, 29 continued. In all, there were 44. These 44 had 1,458 sections in them. That's the current scenario. What has happened in the reform? They have reduced the sections. They have reduced all these 29, condensed them into 4 codes. So 15 were repealed. That means 226 sections went away with the repealment. 29 continued with 1,232 sections. Those 29 have been condensed into 4 codes. These 4 codes have 480 sections. So as you can see, there is a reduction of 67% in terms of number of sections alone in the new proposed labor laws. What has happened? I don't intend to go through the details of this slide, but as you can see, Code on Occupational Health and Safety encompasses or subsumes 13 acts. Code on Social Security subsumes 9 acts. Code on Industrial Relations or IR subsumes 3 acts, and Code on Wage subsumes 4 acts. So if you just look at the Code on Wages, 4 acts including Payment of Wages Act, Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Bonus Act, and Equal Remuneration Act, all 4 acts have been subsumed into one Code on Wages. Similarly, other acts that you can see on the slide have been subsumed into the other 3 codes. Now, in terms of the compliance burden, what has changed? I have classified the compliance burden into current and proposed. As you can see, the left side talks about the current compliance burden and the right side talks about the proposed compliance burden. The proposed is what we are seeing as a result of the codification. So we have broken down the current into 4 items: licenses, registrations, returns, and registers. If you see in the current scenario, there were 3 returns under the Code on Wages. These were all annual returns. The 3 returns in the new scenario have been subsumed under 1 return, which is an annual return. As you can see on the right side of my screen, from 3, we have come down to 1. Currently in the Code on Wages, there were 12 registers. That has been reduced down to 2. Code on Industrial Relations, there were 2 registrations. Those continue. Code on Social Security, there were 4 registrations. They've been brought down to 1. There were 36 overall returns that have been brought down to 4. And there were about 20 odd registers which have been brought down to 1. This is something that we are already starting to see with the draft rules coming in, and still some clarifications are awaited. But at a high level, this is the direction in which the regulatory reform is proceeding. So as you can see in Code on Occupational Health and Safety, from 4 licenses and 11 registrations, which is a total of 15, it has come down to 1 license and 1 registration, which is only 2. So there is a very significant reduction right there. The number of returns were 22, which has been brought down to 1, and number of registers were 76, which has been brought down to 3. So as you can see, the total number of returns, registers, licenses, and registrations are going to see a dramatic reduction. So obviously, one question that we were all grappling with: will the code help rationalize the labor laws? Will I have to do more, less, or equal number of compliances? The answer to that question is very simple. The compliance burden on enterprises is going to reduce as a result of codification. How much? Hopefully this slide gives you some indication, and as the specifics are unfolding, with the draft central rules, and very shortly we expect states to be embarking on this rule making exercise as well, because labor is a concurrent subject on the constitution. So far we are seeing the center take the center stage, and shortly thereafter states will become active as well. Let's move forward and see what else is there. What are the key points of the reform? First, the reforms introduced fixed term employment. This was not there earlier. Companies' ability to hire people for a fixed term was not there. The reforms have brought in this concept, and they are now allowing fixed term employment. It expands the coverage of labor laws. The reforms process has expanded the coverage of labor laws. We discussed this earlier, to include gig workers, platform workers, freelancers, home-based workers, and informal sector workers. All of these have now been brought under the ambit of reform. Managers and supervisors are now covered under overtime regulations. This is another change that has happened. Specifics are yet to be announced, but the intention has been made very clear. Wage payables for employees upon removal, termination, retrenchment, and resignations needs to be settled within 2 working days. I'm not too excited about this personally, because this is going to increase the compliance burden, and operationally it will require more amount of work for people in the HR department, but this is something that is probably going to happen, and we need to be ready for it. Applicability threshold for retrenchments and layoffs has been increased under the Industrial Disputes or IR code, Industrial Relations Code, from 100 in most states to about 300. Some states had already taken up 300, but now this will become the standard threshold. Employers can leverage the Model Industrial Employment Standing Order up to 300 employees. Earlier it was 100, and you needed to create your custom Industrial Employment Standing Order and register that. That should go away with this threshold going up to 300. The new codes, they introduce the concept of a reskilling fund, and we will talk about it later, but that has been brought in for retrenched workers. I'm personally not too excited about this either, because such funds often do not yield the intended outcomes. Process has been laid down to recognize the trade union authorized to negotiate on behalf of the employees, one of the huge issues in the past. There are specifics that have been given here. So not every trade union can represent the employees for the purpose of negotiations. The processes have been made clear. Notice of 14 days has been introduced for unions to go on strike. Strikes are not allowed during the conciliation and arbitration proceedings, thereby reducing the impact on production, revenues, customer expectations, and reducing opportunities for penalty in cases of delays. Process of dispute management between employee and the employer is likely to be simplified, so that the number of visits required, amount of arbitration required will become simpler, and decisions will come out faster. Some of these cases are not likely to drag on for years, as the case is today. Some of the other points in the reform: provision for coverage for ESIC for informal sector. This is a welcome news. Today, workers in informal sectors do not get the benefit of ESIC. That basically means that they have to rely on public health infrastructure, or they have to spend a lot of money from their pocket for private insurance or private hospitals or private healthcare. Now, this will help them leverage the ESIC infrastructure and benefit from it. Provision for different slabs for EPF. Provision to bring informal workers under the ages of minimum wages. Again, this is going to cause issues at some point in time, but this is a directional change that is being brought in. Provision for gratuity for fixed term employees. Contract workers employed through unlicensed contractors will be treated as direct employers of the principal employer. So liability on the principal employer is growing here. Financial penalties have been increased manifold to act as a deterrent. So just so you know, lot more financial penalties are being brought in for non-compliance. The criminalization and jail term has gone down. Recognition of a migrant worker has happened. So there was no concept of migrant worker earlier outside of interstate migrant worker, and it was seldom used. Now government has decided to bring in the recognition of a migrant worker, where there will be a central portal, a registration process, and state governments have to maintain records for all such migrant workmen, and a journey allowance has been brought in to and fro once a year to their home place. So all of these things have been brought in. Eligibility for earned leave has been brought down from 240 days to 180 days. Now, these are very high level. Let's look at the draft rules. All the 4 codes have, the draft rules have been published, and I'll take you code by code and talk about the draft rules. In the meantime, my request is if you can put your questions in the Q&A section so that our experts in the back end, there is Munab and Ramesh, both are a part of this discussion. Both of them are subject matter experts, besides, of course, a few other SMEs that TeamLease has brought to the table today. So please put in your questions, and they will take a look at these questions, and at the opportune moment, I will request them to chime in with specific answers. So please request you to put in your questions. So what are the highlights of the draft rule? So let's start with the first one. Draft Central Code on Wage Rules. The first is the minimum wage. I'm sure all of you have heard that the concept of national floor minimum wage has been introduced. Floor wages, the concept has been introduced. States can go ahead and notify their minimum wages either at par or above the national floor wage. How it will exactly be implemented, the code is silent. The rules are silent so far. What those numbers are going to be is silent. But the government has constituted a technical committee for purpose of advising on the skill categorizations. 681 different types of skills have been identified and categorized in skilled, semi-skilled, skilled and highly skilled categories. 123 in unskilled, 127 in semi-skilled, 320 in skilled, and 111 highly skilled categories. These are the 4 types there. Working hours and overtime, the rules do not cover the provisions of Factories Act. So the establishment where you have establishment of factories covered elsewhere in the OSH code, this does not apply to factory establishments. Normal working day will comprise 8 hours with 1 or more breaks, rest slots, totaling up to a maximum of 1 hour. Overtime wages need to be at least twice the regular wages. So certain states already had twice the regular wages, but certain other states had 1.5 times the wages. So there was a lack of standardization there, and the overtime wages have been brought to double or twice, at least twice the regular wages. Employees who work on the weekly rest day will be eligible for overtime wage payment. Another item, daily and hourly rate of wage calculations has been also been clarified in the code. So how you are going to do on the basis of how many days. So daily wage calculation is on the basis of 26 days and so on. So that clarification has also been issued in the code. Now let's move to process of fixing the floor wage. The process prescribes constituting a central board for the purpose of fixing the floor wage. Floor wages can be different for different geographical regions. So there has been a concept of geographically focused floor wage also. Minimum wage fixed by the state cannot be less than the floor wage. We already kind of discussed this earlier, but that's another important point. Revision to minimum wages need to be done at a time interval not exceeding 5 years. So that's another key point, that one has to revise these at different intervals not exceeding 5 years. Code is silent on the membership of the board that we were talking about, which is going to fix the floor wage, the period of responsibility for the chairperson, parameters, and so on. So code continues to stay silent on this. More information will unfold along the way. Moving on to the next few items, process of deduction and recovery has been prescribed. The manner and conditions for making any deduction has been prescribed. The rule clarifies that the total deduction cannot exceed 50% of the wage. Payment of bonus, principal employer has been made liable to make bonus payments in the event of failure of payment by the contractor. So that's what I was saying earlier, that there is an increased liability on principal employer in case of an event of failure of payments by the contractor. The liability falls squarely on the principal employer. The wage slip, employers are mandated to issue wage slips. Form 5 has been prescribed on or before the payment of wages. Timely wage payment has been emphasized. The principal employer has to make timely wage payments to the contractors to enable the contractor to make payment to the contract employee. So again, the liability and role of principal employer has been increased here, and they now need to make timely wage payments to their contractors so that timely wage payment can be made by contractor to the end employee or contract worker. Inspection scheme, provision for digital initiation of inspection request has been brought in. And folks, this is something really exciting. for TeamLease and Avantis, because we foresee the future of compliance in India as a digital future. And here, in a number of places, you will see that greater focus on digitization has been brought in. Provision for digital inspection request has also been brought in. Specifics on when it will be implemented, how will it be implemented, which portal will be required, is something where we see that the code is silent, the draft rules are silent, but it's a step in the right direction. Well begun is half done. And we think if government continues the focus on digitization and implements some of these in a timely manner, before too long, a lot of these labor laws will become highly digital. Registers and records, employers to maintain register of wages, overtime, fine, deductions of damage and loss in Form 1 and employee register in Form 4. These have been specified. So draft rules have also provided the formats in which the data has to be maintained. Moving on to the industrial relation rules, draft rules have been published. As far as standing order is concerned, employers are required to intimate the concerned certifying officer in case they decide to use or adopt the model industrial employment standing order, which is different from how it was there currently. Not too excited. I'm personally not too excited about this, because in the current scenario, you could go ahead by default, adopt the model industrial employment standing order. In the new scenario, if you decide to do so, and the threshold obviously has been increased from 100 to 300, but in case you do decide to adopt it, the requirement has been brought in to intimate the concerned certifying officer. So that's an increased operational compliance burden on the employers. We discussed that the threshold has been increased from 100 to 300 workmen. Conciliation proceedings, the Samadhan will serve as a central portal. Again, another evidence of digitization. They are talking about making Samadhan portal as the central portal for maintenance of digital records, for management of all industrial disputes and conciliation proceedings. Awards which are passed by industrial disputes and conciliation bodies or national tribunals will be uploaded electronically on the Samadhan portal, and intimations will happen thereof. So as you can see, another area where digitization will play a vital role. You don't need to run around like a headless chicken to get records. All of these should be available in a centralized place. Strikes and lockout, the notice of strikes and lockout need to be intimated electronically. So again, focus on electronic digital to three constituents: employee, employer, and the concerned labor authority. So all three constituents or stakeholders need to be notified of the notice of strike or lockout digitally. Layoff, retrenchment, and closure. Again, the notice for layoff, retrenchment, and closure needs to be intimated electronically to all three constituents: employee, employer, and the concerned labor authority. Permissions to layoff, retrench, and closure needs to be granted electronically again. So continued focus on digitization, continued focus on electronic communication. As we had discussed, reskilling fund is being proposed, where provision for reskilling fund is there. Fund has to be electronically credited within 10 days of the workman retrenchment. So as you can see, another focus on electronic and digital, where the credit has to be made. The amount is calculated on the basis of 15 days of the workman wages. So that amount has to be credited to the reskilling fund, and it is proposed that this fund will help reskill the retrenched employees. So that's really the intention. I'm personally not too excited, because such funds have in the past languished. There are thousands of crores of funds available in the kitty in BOCW, which is building and other construction workers. But we have seen what the workers have gone through in case of crisis like COVID, reverse migration, and so on and so forth. So I would love to see the specifics on how this fund will be used and how it will help improve the skilling. But this is a provision that has been made. Moving on to the OSH rules, registrations. So new establishments need to register electronically. Another mention of the word electronic on the Shram Suvidha portal. So either you are already registered or you're not. If you're already registered, well and good. If you're not registered, within 6 months, you will have to go ahead and register yourself on the Shram Suvidha portal. All new establishments by default will have to register themselves on the Shram Suvidha portal. So that's another input that has come in. Form 1 has been prescribed for electronic registration within 60 days of the commencement of code. So Form 1 has also been prescribed. Annual health examination has become mandatory. Employers need to conduct mandatory health checkups for employees who have completed 45 years of age within 120 days of the commencement of the year. So that's another one. Safety committee shall meet at least once a quarter. So they have specified the frequency of the meeting of the safety committee. In case of mines, the safety committee can meet once a month. So for mines, because the hazard is more, danger is greater, the mandate is that the safety committee should meet once a month. As far as overtime wages are concerned, they need to be at least double the regular wages. We already spoke about it, and migrant workers have been covered as a part of what we just discussed. As far as inspections are concerned, inspector and facilitator needs to issue prohibition or improvement notice. So as you may have heard, the inspector is also now responsible for facilitation. The role has been made more constructive. Earlier, it was more of somebody who came across as a hostile person. In this case, this is a scenario where they are supposed to act as a facilitator. So they need to issue the notice, prohibition and improvement. Form 12 has been prescribed to document non-compliance of provision of safety, health and working conditions. So that form has also been notified. Now, one of the exciting things from an inclusion of women in the workforce is concerned, women have been allowed to work during the night shift between 6 a.m. and between the periods of 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. In this, written consent will be required. The employer will be responsible for providing adequate transportation facility for pickup and drop. Welfare facilities, safe and healthy working conditions will be required to be arranged by the employer. And provisions of sexual harassment or POSH Act has been made mandatory. So earlier, employers with 10 workmen and above were responsible for this. Now it has been made mandatory. If you are employing women worker in the night shift and you are under a minimum threshold, even then the POSH implementation has been made compulsory. We already spoke about the journey allowance to interstate migrant worker, and that will continue. As far as code on social security rules are concerned, a national social security board for gig workers and platform workers has been proposed. The social security benefits that we had discussed are now being extended to gig and platform workers. Mandatory registration has been enunciated here on a centralized portal using Aadhaar to avail the social security benefit. Right now, I don't think the portal exists. The rules are silent on the specifics of the portal, but platform aggregators are supposed to share the database with the portal so that the free information exchange can happen. In addition, the aggregator or platform aggregators are required to contribute 1% of their turnover to the fund on a month-to-month basis, so that this fund can be utilized for the welfare of platform gig and other workers. As far as gratuity is concerned, fixed-term employees who can complete 1 year of service are eligible for gratuity. So as you can see, it has been brought down to 1 year from 5 years. The current scenario, there is no provision for fixed-term employment. So if you employ a fixed-term employment, the provision of gratuity has been made. If the fixed-term worker serves the company for a minimum period of 1 year, they become eligible for gratuity. For every additional year of completed service, in excess of 6 months, the employee is eligible to receive gratuity at the rate of 15 days wages for every completed year. So that also has been provided. So as you can see, fixed term employment has been made attractive. Provision for gratuity, provision for leave has been created. So employers can go ahead and start leveraging this kind of employment contract to fulfill their obligations. Creche establishment with 50 or more women employees. Now this is a change. Earlier, women word was not there. Earlier, it was only 50 or more employees. The change has come into the rules where establishment with 50 or more women employees need to maintain a creche for the use of children under the age of 6 years. Creche facilities should be located within appropriate distance from the establishment. The definition of appropriate is left for interpretation. Earlier, they had given, some states had given the distance in terms of kilometer, 500 meters or 1 kilometer. In this case, the word appropriate has been used, and the facility needs to be extended to women working from home as well. Now, this is an area where I'm not very clear as to how an employer is going to go and make this facility available to the women who's working from home, especially if they're working in a different city. Logistically, it can be more challenging than one can realize. So rules are still continuing to be silent on the specific items of the implementation, but this is something that we already know. Intimation of vacancies under the Employment Exchange Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act of 1960. Quarterly ER1 returns have been replaced by an annual EIR return. Form has been prescribed 26. So that form has been brought in to replace ER1 forms and returns, which are quarterly. So as you can see, the 4 ER1 have been replaced by one EIR return in that form 26. Provision for electronic returns has also been made, which is great. Another focus on digitization. I'm really excited about where the digital future is heading and how government is enabling some of that in the existing labor rules. So that is really what I had from a reform overview perspective. We are at 3:42 right now. We have about 20 minutes left with us. I would certainly want to make sure that we can open up our session for Q&A. We have a number of subject matter experts from TeamLease, and I can see some 7 or 8 questions already which have been brought in. I will look at the question and request one of our SMEs to come in and answer that question. Okay, so let me just quickly browse through the questions here, and I do request other attendees to send their questions as well. I have a question. What are the provisions regarding safety committee and canteen committee in the new labor codes? Munab, Ramesh, anyone of you would like to answer this question? Please go ahead, unmute yourself and answer the question. So while logistically we figure out how Munab and Ramesh can answer this question, because I can see that they have been permitted to talk. Ramesh, would you like to take this question? So Prasanna, Ramesh, Munab, all of you have been permitted to talk from a Zoom point of view. Would any one of you want to unmute?
Sir, this is Munab. Please repeat the questions.
So there is a question. What are the provisions regarding safety committee and canteen committee in the new labor codes?
Yes, sir. The safety committee, they given us every establishment where 100 or more workers working. In that case, the safety committee become mandatory, and the canteen committee will be wherever the canteen constituted. In that case, the canteen committee will be made mandatory. The canteen facility has to be provided where the 50 or more employees were employed. In that case, the canteen committee will become a mandate.
Okay, let's move to the next question. What is the definition of salary here? Does it include superannuation, leave encashment, HRA, NPS, CLA?
Sir, here I would like to say that the definition of wages of Code on Wages 2019 talk about the definition of wages, which has 3 parts. The first part will be the basic DA and retaining allowances. The second part, it says that exclusion. The exclusion will be the part of HRA, house accommodation provided on subsidiary, any travel construction provided, any employer contributions on provident fund or pension scheme, any bonus payables, commission payables, any incentive payables. All this put together, they put under the bracket of second scenario. There is a third scenario also available that is talking about 2 parameters. That is, one is gratuity, another one is retrenchment compensation. In this, the second scenario, exclusion part, whatever may be the told, the similar way the house rent accommodation allowances, bonus payables, incentive, commission payable, travel congestion, all this put together not to exceed 50% of the total wages. That is the challenge here. We could see that the basic DA and retaining allowances, these 3 parts supposed to be more than 60% of the total wages. That is what this labor codes recommends. So in this case, we could see that the financial impact may increase in two cases. One is if the basic wages is keep less than 15,000 for the purpose of PF. In this case, definitely the basic wage is supposed to be more than 50%. If they maintain threshold of 15,000, in that case, it's not going to harm certain establishments. If it is less than 15,000 threshold, in that case, definitely the employer and employee, both the contributions may increase certainly. So the employee's take home will reduce. Similar way, the gratuity part, the gratuity currently we calculate on the basic wages. Now this code says that not only basic, DA and retaining allowances also become wages. So the gratuity needs to be calculated on these three parameters. It is more than 50% of the total wages. So definitely the gratuity cost to the employee will increase. So certainly we need to see that whether the employee will bear the cost or employer. If employer stick to the CTC, in that case, the employee's take home definitely will go for reduce. Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you, Manab. The next question here is gratuity eligibility for 1 year, whether 240 working days will be considered as 1 year.
Sorry, sir, please come back, sir. I lost you.
The question is, I hope you can see the questions on the Q&A section. The question says gratuity eligibility of 1 year. This is for the fixed term employment, right?
Yes, sir.
So the question is whether 240 working days will be considered as 1 year.
No, sir, it says 1 year completed service. If any fixed term employee is completed 1 year service, then he will be eligible. There is no limits has been prescribed under this code.
So the working days has not been prescribed in the year.
Yes, sir, correct.
The assumption is 26 working days will be there in a month.
Yes, sir.
And then there is paid leave eligibility that kicks in, which is
yes, sir. Total period will be 1 year, sir. Total period 1 year. If he crosses the 1 year, then he will be eligible for the gratuity payments.
So Ninad Sardesai has asked a question: is there an upper limit on overtime hours in any month? So currently, Ninad, you're absolutely right. There are different thresholds for overtime hours in different states. For daily overtime, weekly overtime, and then a quarterly overtime threshold. So the question here, Munab, is there an upper limit prescribed in a month? I don't think a monthly threshold was ever there. It was either daily, weekly, or quarterly. But go ahead, please answer.
So the threshold limits were not disclosed under this code. It said that state-specific subject, so states has to frame the rule. The state rules will clarify about the overtime hours or prescribed or maximum limits will be only disclosed by the state rules.
Okay, excellent. The next question is, central government has been talking about implementing these codes from 1st April onwards. Do you think this would happen looking at the current scenario and multi-ruling parties operations? So this is Rustamji who's asking this question. We're all playing it by the ear, Rustamji, and as you would know, labor is a concurrent subject. States have to create rules as well. Right now, what we are seeing is the codes and the central draft rules that have come out. After the draft comes out, they stay out there for public commentary for a certain number of days. And even if they notify a large number of industries, central rules are not necessarily directly applicable, with the exception of a few where appropriate government is central. Rest of them still will need to wait for the states to notify for specifics to come out. Munab, would you like to add to this answer?
Yes, sir, you're exact, sir. Because every state has to frame their own rule against these all 4 codes. Then only they will be ready to implement it. We could see that few states already started framing the draft rules, but many of the states not yet started. They have to frame the rules and they have to have the common platform as prescribed under the code. They have to have a digitized platform on it.
Okay.
So it will take some time.
There's another question by Ninad Sardesai. If a workman works on his weekly off, will he be entitled to comp off or OT or both? I think I know the answer. It's the double it's considered as the OT also. But Munab, why don't you take it?
Yes, sir, it is correct, sir. As per the code prescribed that any employee works on weekly holiday has to be paid double the normal wages.
The question is, will he also get a compensatory day off?
No, sir. No, it is not prescribed in it.
Right. So either it will be a compensatory day off or it will be considered overtime, right?
Yes, sir.
What are the basic components to be considered for deciding basic wages as per the code?
3 components, sir. Basic, DA and retaining allowances. All put together supposed to be more than 50% of the total wages. We can say that CTC, more than 50% of the CTC.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question. Sagar has again asked the question, please explain provisions regarding the canteen committee.
So canteen committee has to be formed wherever the establishment have establishing the canteen, which is made mandatory for 50 or more employing establishments where the canteen is mandatory. For them, the canteen committee has to be formed with the equal number of members. The total number of members of the committee not to exceed 10. In this case, the employer and employee representatives are supposed to be equally, and one chairperson to be nominated by the employer, who may be the senior person of it. The committee is supposed to meet in a frequency, but frequency, everything is not clarified under the rules. It has to meet frequently, and they have to do all the required parameters or hygiene facilities, all the arrangements, fixation of rates. All this has to be taken care by the committees.
Okay.
The records to be preserved.
So in synopsis, any establishment with 50 or more needs to have a canteen committee. The committee will not exceed a total membership of 10 people with equal representation from employee and the employer. And committee will, there are specifics on the meeting and specific operations of the committee. The reconstitution has also been there in the legacy laws. I don't think the specifics have come out yet in the new code and draft rules. Is the gratuity reduced from 5 years to 1 year for permanent employees? I don't think so, but Munab, why don't you go ahead and answer that?
No, sir. It is still, the remains same only. 4 years, 240 days in case of 6 days working establishment. But only for fixed term employees, it has been made into 1 year. Only for fixed term employees.
Is the contract workers included? So Prabodh is asking a question. Thanks, Prabodh, for asking. Is the contract workers included in the limit of 300 numbers for standing orders applicability?
Sorry, sir, I lost you.
Is the contract worker included in the limit of 300? We spoke that up to 300 employees, you can use the model industrial employment standing order, right?
Yes, sir.
So the question is the contract worker included in the limit of 300?
Yes, sir. Yes, including the contractual employees.
So hopefully you get the answer, Prabodh. This includes the contract employee. Ninad Sirdesai again has a question. If the establishment is not registered with the employment exchange, how to get it registered?
Sir, again, employment exchange is a state subject. So the code proposed that it has to be digitized. We have to wait for the rules to be framed. Maybe the rules or the certain arrangements by the state will give the clarity on the registration and other parts.
So, the way I am reading this question, Munab, is in the existing law, if this establishment is not yet registered with employment exchange, how should they go about registering it?
Sir, existing very few states have the registration procedure for employment exchange. We need to see state by state. There are very similar as like very simple documents required for registration in online.
Right. So there is another question which says, is there any mobile app for all labor related compliance updates? Absolutely. You can look up Rulesbook, RULEZBOOK, Rulesbook. It's available on iOS and Android platform. You can download it, onboard yourself in a matter of few seconds and start using it for the purpose of labor updates. So we have another question from Manoj Namdi. Provided further the purpose of equal wages for all gender and purpose of emolument specified. So shall the emolument excluded? I will just type this question for you, Ramesh and Munab, on the chat so that you can see it. And I think it's a long question. Instead of reading it here, I will just type it. Please read it and respond. So we'll wait for them to come back with an answer. Suyash asked, if an employer are not given annual increment or any performance ex gratia for specific employees as his work performance is excellent, also the organization is in good profit. I do not understand the question, Suyash. Are you saying that if the performance is good and you don't pay annual increment or bonus, what happens? Is that what your question is? It depends on whether the person is included in the Payment of Bonus Act. Only then the statutory bonus requirement comes in. If they are above the threshold, then the Payment of Bonus Act may not be applicable to them. Is that right, Munab? Can you clarify?
Yes, sir. See, the increment is company's internal procedure. Subject to if employee more than the minimum wages, there is no necessary for providing the year-on-year increments. And again, when it comes to bonus part, it is a statutory bonus. If employee is eligible for this particular bonus part, it is mandatory to provide the bonus to the respective employees. Otherwise, the bonus is not eligible for them.
Great, thank you. How is ESIC is better than central and state health policies for other sectors and migrant workers? So ESIC operates a large number of hospitals with a very high coverage across the country. These hospitals are fairly good and provide very decent healthcare. The kind of premiums that an employee pay with somebody with 10,000 rupees in salary, they contribute about 400 or something like that rupees, which is about 4% or something in that range, to ESIC as premium for himself, his family, parents, and so on, which is considered to be one of the cheapest forms of health insurance for the quality of coverage and nationwide presence that is there. So I think ESIC is a much better healthcare option as compared to private insurer. If it is applicable and available to informal employees, it would definitely improve the quality of their social security healthcare benefit. Anything you would like to add, Manab?
Is it correct, sir? Whatever your statement is.
Ajay has a question. Is the exclusion clause applicable only for wages below rupees 15,000? I didn't understand the exclusion. What did exclusion mean?
Sir, it is talking about the wages, wage definition. In this case, it is for all. It is not about the 15,000 or less or higher. It is for all the employees. The definition of wage says three portions. The first part, basic DA retaining allowances. Second part says there is an exclusion part. This exclusion part not to be exceeding 50%. In that case, we need to push the maximum to these three components, basic DA and retaining allowances. There is no threshold limit or wage limit for this wage definition. It is applicable to all the employees.
Another question is, will labor codes be implemented retrospectively? I don't think so. A rule that has not even been created, I don't think has any likelihood of being enforced retrospectively. But Manab, would you like to answer that?
No, sir. There is no chance of retrospective effect. Maybe they plan to start from 1st of April by the central government. Still, many of the state governments not yet started the process. It will take some more time.
Sagar is requesting for a copy of presentation on the email ID. Sure, we will be happy to do so. Govind Singh Bora has asked 50% of total salary should constitute basic. Up to what level is this applicable? OT needs to be paid on basic plus DA or entire salary?
Sir, OT needs to be paid on daily average wages. It is they given the daily wage calculation and how to calculate per day wage and per hour wage. The OT will be definitely, it will be hourly wage and needs to be calculated, and twice the ordinary hourly wage. So in this, we need to predict that whether this exclusion part not to exceed 50%, that need to be taken care. All assumption numbers only, bonus payables and pension payables and interest earned by the employee because of employer's pension contribution, NPS and all. The employees will receive certain annuity amounts and all. This has to be predicted and provided across.
Somebody has asked, Krishna Gavde has asked, what is exactly a retaining allowance? If the wage composition doesn't have this component, then which components will be considered for calculation of gratuity?
Retaining allowance, nothing but other than the required allowances, whatever may be the name called, given for just to adjust the wages, that will be treated as retaining allowances, other than the purpose of wages. So all the components will be treated as retaining allowances. Maybe if you provided a uniform to the employees, you will be giving the washing allowances to the employee. You given certain transportation facilities, so you will be subsidizing the transport facility to the employees. Otherwise, if you largely will be paying all the employees transportation allowances, without giving the uniform, you will be providing uniform allowances. You will be giving some other project allowances. All this put together will be treated as retaining allowances only. Other than the purpose, whatever may be the name called, it is paid. It will be treated as retaining allowances.
Excellent. Well, we are on the hour, on top of the hour. It is 4 o'clock exactly. It brings us to the end of this session. I thank you profusely for joining us. In case you do have additional questions, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer those questions. If you would like us to make a presentation to your senior and executive team, please call upon us. I would personally want to thank on behalf of TeamLease to Thane Belapur Industrial Association and its committees for giving us this opportunity so that we could do this session for everyone. We hope the session was useful and provided you some more insights into how the labor codes are unfolding and what does it mean, how are you impacted, and what decisions you need to take, what actions are required, and start getting yourselves mentally ready for this. So with that, thank you so much for joining in. We look forward to your next interaction. Go ahead and download Rulesbook app, RULEZBOOK, for free regulatory updates on iOS and Android platform, or you can go to teamleasecompliance.com or avantis.co.in. Both are the same site, and you can sign yourself up for a newsletter. Again, I repeat, it's teamleasecompliance.com, www.teamlease, L-E-A-S-E, compliance, C-O-M-P-L-I-A-N-C-E, teamleasecompliance.com. So please visit teamleasecompliance.com and register yourself for a free daily, weekly, monthly newsletter on all the regulatory updates. Until next time, thank you very much. Have a good day.